I'm good. I'm good. I'm hanging out with a big stuffed animal. On my period. First period back. Could have gone longer. I was okay with not having a period. I actually texted my friends like halfway through pregnancy and I was like, the best part of this whole thing is not having a period. Like, this is amazing. Did you guys know about this? When you're pregnant, you don't have a period. Yeah. But it's all good. It's good because I was like on an emotional roller coaster last week and finally figured out why. So I wasn't just having a minor breakdown. I was actually hormonally a little whacked out in my body.
Yeah. I had a little party when I read that text message. I was like, oh, okay, good.
I know.
Like, everything makes sense now.
Yeah. I had actually canceled a recording with Hanna because I was like, I'm just too overwhelmed. I can't do it. I need to like take a mental break. Like, this is too much. And then like also had a little moment with my husband and was like, I need to, and I just like left the room and spontaneously decided to take a bath. It was just quite an evening. It was quite an evening. And then at the end of that evening, right as I was about to go to bed, I went to the bathroom and there was my period and I was like, oh, thank God. Whew. Everything's okay. I mean, everything is still stressful, but it's not like, everything's just a little more heightened when you're on your period.
Yeah.
This was quite a height. Heights we'd not reached for months.
It's so great when you have like an answer to it and you're not just like, I always feel very relieved when I'm not just like, oh, that's why I'm like crazy.
Right.
It helps.
That's why I feel like my whole life is falling apart. Oh, turns out my life is not falling apart. I'm just perceiving it in a very specific and intense way this week because of how my body is working.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was a time.
I have so many questions. Now I can't wait to do that episode because I have so many questions for you. But we want to talk about something else today, so.
Yes, we do. What are we talking about? Tell the people what we're talking about.
I like how you've started to ask me to tell the people. You said so in the last recording. It makes me feel grand. Like it.
Yeah.
Tell the people.
Please present to the folk.
We want to talk about choosing where and with whom to give birth.
Yeah.
So like.
You said that so much better than I did the last time we recorded this.
Oh, thanks. Then I'll stop talking now and not say anything else again, because that was my high point. See, I already ruined it.
Yeah, so choosing a birth team and choosing a birth location, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how our thoughts on all of that have evolved, and then what I feel about the decision that I made in looking back. And what we'd want, or what I'd want to do next time, and what you'd want to do.
Yeah.
Now. Or not now. She's not pregnant. Everybody calm down.
Uh-huh. I started writing a blog post about that. And I was about to say another thing that would tease something. I'm going to stop doing that. Never mind. Skip over it. Okay, I'm still very wound up from what happened previously to pushing the record button. So can you start? So
Absolutely. So I touched on it a little bit in our hypnobirthing episode, but I had a pretty open mind about birth stuff and sort of questioning the norms around birth, based on my mom's birth experiences and the stories that she told about those. Um, so I was sort of open to, I guess, just investigating a little more what exactly I wanted around my births, and what that would then look like. Once I started thinking more about it and learning more about it when I was older, and actually having a baby became, not an immediate reality, but something, closer to the present. I don't remember ever planning to give birth in a hospital. I think I sort of always imagined giving birth in a birth center. Um, and I don't know if that's true, but that's how I remember it. Um, that being said, when I started my pregnancy, there wasn't an available birth center near me. So I actually didn't start my prenatal care at a birth center. I started my prenatal care in a hospital system at a regular OBGYN practice. They had nurse midwives and DOs on staff, which is I believe that stands for Doctor of Obstetrics. No, that's not true. Doctor of something. The idea behind that designation, I don't remember what it stands for, but the idea behind that designation is a more holistic approach to medicine. So I was very hopeful about this practice, and was like, well, if there's not a birth center nearby, I'll go to this place that has nurse midwives and has these, different kind of doctors, and we'll see how it goes. And that changed then throughout my pregnancy, but that was sort of where I came from. I imagined at the beginning, and I wanted to and preferred to not give birth in a hospital for lots of reasons. And I feel like you have a better enumeration of those. So I'll just me too the ones that I agree with. But and then my foray into hypnobirthing sort of reinforced that and gave me more concrete ideas and reasons about what I was looking for. So where did you start this whole journey? Where would, as like a teenager, how did you picture your births? Or did you even?
Yeah, I think so. Not as detailed as I do now, but when I grew up, was surrounded with hospital stories, and that the norm is giving birth in a hospital. So that's what was in my head, and that's what was normal for me. My mom gave birth in a hospital, and that's all I ever heard. And she had an uncomplicated birth. She doesn't have any trauma around it. It was very fast. When we talk about it, I'm like, you should not, like, some women might get mad at you when you say that, because it was like 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was very fast.
Like start to finish 2 hours? Like she started having contractions and then the baby was there in 2 hours?
I think the time frame where you said it was like 8 hours or something, like not your 36 time frame for her was 2 hours, but
from like active labor?
Yeah.
That was like 5 hours for me, I think.
Yeah, so that was that, and I was also imagining that my mother would be there, and it was probably gonna be fast too, and that's it.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't really think about it a lot, and I do remember, now that I'm saying that, being scared of it, and I think, have we touched on that before? I'm not sure, maybe in the hypnobirthing one, that we have this, in our society, we have this picture that birth is loud and scary, and you tear, and
violent, like threatening, scary, and painful.
Yeah. So I think actually that was my picture of it. I knew I really wanted children, but I was scared of birth because I had this picture that it was going to be scary and painful and loud, and lying on this table with my legs spread open and people yelling at me to push, and I don't know. Maybe birth. Not that intense, but yeah. Movie birth, essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
So then a few years ago, 2016, I, on YouTube, stumbled across, I want to know what my algorithm was at that point, like how this was suggested to me. There was suggested to me a video of a alone birth of a woman.
Oh, like a free birth?
Oh, yeah, I guess that's what's called. Yeah, in German it's Alleingeburt. So, yeah, free birth sounds about right. Completely by herself in her yard, like between the swing set, and just giving birth by herself. Mm-hmm. And at first I was shocked and like watching, it was like driving by an accident. I couldn't, like, I didn't want to, but I had to watch it and was like, but I had to watch it. And it was shocking to me, but it also intrigued me. So I then started looking into that. Mm-hmm. At first, I looked further into her and like what her reasons were, and she actually has a pretty cool channel. She has, I don't know, a lot of kids by now, and I think all of them she has given birth to herself. I think she actually has a medical background, so she does a lot of like explaining videos. Like she does her whole care by herself and explains how she does that, how she anyways, and then searched for more videos and found like social media accounts and started looking into that and all the reasoning behind it, and got really fascinated by it to the point that I was like, yeah, I can do that. I'm gonna give birth by myself. I don't know how long that lasted.
Yeah.
But that at some point changed to, well, maybe it's not, like, it doesn't hurt to have a midwife there.
Yeah.
Maybe that thought started because when I would talk about it to people in my close circle, they would be worried, which I know primarily, I say that because specifically of the people that said that, they have this narrative that I had before, that birth is dangerous and painful and all these things, and that is dangerous to do by yourself, so they got scared. So then I allowed myself the idea to, okay, how would I feel about having a midwife there, and started researching that. Researching more, that's not the right word. Like having conversations with myself and trying out how I felt about it. So then that evolved to... I actually also didn't know that there were birth centers. Like, growing up, for me, it was just hospitals, and that's it.
Right.
So somewhere along there, I found out about birth centers. I was like, oh, that's really cool.
Yeah,
Maybe
I don't
I'll do
remember when
that.
I found out about those either, but I'm sure I didn't know about them as a kid.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So that
they
was
are
a
very
huge
cool.
revelation to me.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's really cool. Nice. So then thought for a hot second, that's a nice idea. Maybe I'll do that. But kind of always came back to wanting to do it at home or an environment that I chose. Like, I've been at the point where Megan kind of wanted me to give birth in the States for a moment. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll fly there and give birth in your home. So my kid has 3 nationalities.
You wanted to do that so that
yeah,
your birth would have
that's how it
citizenship.
started. I started looking into countries where you get the nationality just by being born there.
Right.
And the US was one of them. And then I brought up that idea. And then we had fun with that for a minute.
Yeah.
So I even had considered that, to go somewhere else that I feel really good, and it's like warm and a lot of nature and, you know, whatever. Right now I'm at the point that I want to give birth in my home. I don't want to travel somewhere else and find a nice spot somewhere else. I want to do it in my home.
Yeah.
And have a midwife there. I would like to have a doula there. I said last week jokingly to Megan, I kind of want a videographer there too. So I don't know how many people are gonna end up.
I'll just
I
come
want
in
Megan
video.
there.
Yeah,
exactly.
I'll just come and take pictures and video. It won't be as pretty though as having a professional do it.
Yeah. My husband, obviously, did I say that? I want my partner to be there
Not
too. Yeah, so I'm
Sounds
curious.
like a crowd.
Yeah, right. I'm curious how many people it's gonna be in the end, because, you know, I keep changing my mind.
Yeah.
It's gonna evolve, I'm sure. That's just where I'm at right now. When I recently talked to my husband about it and started listing all the people, he was like, can we not though? That's a lot of people.
The house isn't that big.
Oh, the living room's huge.
The living room is huge, but it could definitely get filled up with people.
Yeah. And that's also something that actually surprised me about myself. Because one of the reasons I got so excited about the idea that a free birth could be good, once I deconstructed all those beliefs about that's really dangerous. I liked the idea a lot.
Which I will jump in and say, it totally can be dangerous.
All of these can be, yes.
Right. All of these can be, birth can be dangerous.
Yes.
But it's not, the majority of births are not dangerous and don't have to be dangerous. And don't start as dangerous.
Yeah. I'm not going into details here for a reason. I don't want to advocate for anything. And I'm not even listing, like, when I say I considered a free birth, it's not because like, I didn't see a beautiful video and was like, oh, that looks like fun, and then the decision was made. I did look into that and, like, okay, what would I need to make that be a good scenario? Like, I had a construct around that, how I would set that up for that to be okay. But
I think it's also easy, though, to assume that those decisions are or are not made thoughtfully. So I just wanted to be clear, like, it was a thoughtful process.
Thank you. You said something along those lines in the pregnancy rules episode that I really liked. You said, and I even took this quote for our Instagram post, I think. He said, anyone outside of that pregnant person doesn't know what went into this decision.
Right.
So this applies here as well.
Mm-hmm. And that applies to free births, that applies to hospital births, that applies to planned C-sections, that applies to birth center births, that applies to water births, that applies to land birth, it applies to every single
It really applies to any
kind
decision
of
in life, right?
Right. We're just talking about birth specifically.
Yeah.
In this here little universe we're creating.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a disclaimer that we wanted to give here.
Yeah. I guess just context and thoughts, or like meta thinking. I don't know.
Yeah. Where was I?
Sorry.
No.
You said once you deconstructed birth being dangerous, and that's when I jumped in. Once you started thinking what you liked about free birth after you had deconstructed the idea of birth being dangerous, and then how you ended up moving from there to having a whole bunch of people in the room.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I liked about the free birth idea was it just being me and my partner, because I am an introvert and it takes me a lot of energy to be around people and to have to communicate things and have lots of energies there and all the things. So that sounded really good to me, knowing that a birth requires all my concentration and energy. So what a great concept to not need to use this energy for other people and social contact and all that stuff. So
I'm sorry if you can hear Hunter talking, but he's on calls.
I can't. That's fine.
Okay. Well, if it's in the recording.
Yeah, no, I know. But I think if I can't hear it, you won't be able to hear it in the recording. But thank you. So it was surprising to me that now I'm adding more and more people.
Yeah.
But that is also something that just came with thinking more about it, listening to more stories, hearing more stories, watching more videos about it, hearing you talk about it. People that are in your birth and that you choose to be there, probably, there are different expectations. It's a different situation. It's not like a party and people expect from you to socialize with them. Everybody that is there to support you.
Yep.
And
there to actually take a job from you, right?
Yeah.
It's so that you can use all of your energy and concentration on what you're doing, and you don't have to be thinking about the things that they're there to do.
Yeah. So I guess that was something else that I needed to deconstruct for myself, that I don't need to entertain anyone. I don't need to talk to anyone. I don't need to think about how is everyone else feeling, because that's just not my job right there, right then. And that is okay.
Yeah.
So once that happened, and then that also goes into choosing who is there, like who can see it that way and who would act that way, and who do I trust in that way.
Yeah. Trust is huge.
Yeah. I feel like I'm rambling.
No, I'll jump off from there. Trust is the main sticking point for me. And it sounds like that's kind of where you're ending up as well. But the idea that I came to was, if I don't totally trust every single person that's there, like, I need to be able to trust the people that are there. And that's not to say that doctors aren't trustworthy or that the hospital wouldn't be trustworthy. my situation was I started in this practice, and the very first consultation that I had at the hospital practice I started at was a really bad experience. The person wrote down my dates wrong. They talked to me like a child. They told me that, like, I had brought my prenatal vitamins to have them, look and see how they were. And literally, their reaction to those vitamins was, well, there's not much of anything in this, is there? They didn't give me any recommendations. They didn't give me specific things that it needed more of. They didn't give me, like, no detail. So that's how we started the adventure at this practice. And it kind of colored the whole experience, because then the next appointment we had, we went in like guns blazing, fists out, ready to defend ourselves. And the sweet doctor that we met with was like, wow, okay. Like, it was just a really uncomfortable interaction. And we didn't give her the information, we didn't give the doctor the information of our last appointment. So she was probably completely blindsided by how defensive we were. And Hunter in particular, because he was obviously very upset about what had happened, and again came into this appointment like planning to stand up for me, and like, so there was that. And then the other thing was the people that were seeing us in my prenatal care, weren't necessarily going to be at the hospital on call when we went in, when I gave birth. And that was a huge deal for me. I wanted to know the people that were going to be at my birth, because I wanted to trust them implicitly. I didn't want to have to think about their decisions and question each moment as it came. Like, if something complicated were to come up, I wanted to be able to assume that that person knew me, knew what I wanted, and had my back. And someone that you've never met before could be absolutely fantastic, could be on a completely different wavelength from me, like, just, and everything in between. So trust is what it came down to for me, and that's what I didn't want to have to trust myself. I didn't want to have to depend on myself or Hunter in that situation to be making every single little decision and defending the choices that we had made, which may or may not have been challenged. I don't know what would have happened, because we didn't end up giving birth there. But that was why we ended up not going there, because we wouldn't have known the people we were giving birth with. And that was a big deal for me. Yeah.
I just realized something while you talked about that.
What's that?
The trust ties it all together, right? I realized that is the line that I was this is the train that goes through my process.
Right. From the idea that I grew up with, that birth is dangerous and painful and it has to be in a hospital and all that, from there going to the free birth, is what happened there is I built the trust in myself that I and my body are capable to birth, that everything is there. There's a higher wisdom within me, and more specifically within my body, because this female body is made for this, that is going to lead me through there, and most likely everything is going to be fine. And
probably not going to be any reason for any complications. So I built that first with the free birth idea. And then once I had that trust in myself and in the natural way
Process.
of things, like in nature and how it's set up, how it's supposed to happen.
In the, biological, physiological
that
reality of pregnancy and birth.
Yeah. Then I could go into trusting other people and choosing other people to be in there with me in that situation.
Yeah.
But I had to start with myself. So it now makes a lot of sense to me that I started with this extreme, I don't like that word, but I kind of went from this one side, like right into the other end of things.
Right, the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's why I said extreme. I needed that to, like, I needed to experience the other end of things to have experienced them all and find my middle, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I started building the trust in other people and in caregivers. Cool.
Yeah, and figuring
I just realized that just now.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks.
I think that's the huge thing in birth, in medical care generally. Trusting yourself, trusting that you know what's happening in your body. Like if you're sick and you have symptoms, you have to trust that you know that those symptoms are significant in order to get the care that you need. And then if you find a doctor or some other care provider, that you trust them to trust you, you trust them to believe what you're saying, you trust them to investigate those symptoms, to look from every angle, to be an expert, right? Because what you're, like you had said, that the person that you first found in free birth had a medical background. Like she was able to be an expert in not only her own body, but also in the birth experience and then in her prenatal care, right? And I don't particularly want to be an expert in prenatal care, but I do want to find an expert who will see me and trust me, and who I can in turn trust and see. And I think that's integral to any interaction that we have about our bodies, and especially about giving birth. And it feels so much more. What I realized is, as I was pregnant and as I was making these decisions, what did eventually give me the push and what made me stop like making excuses for how I was feeling and making excuses for how I was being treated is the word, but I wasn't being mistreated. I was just being treated within a care system. Everyone that I interacted with, aside from that first consultation, was lovely at the OBGYN practice. They were really lovely people. They didn't have time, and I was not complicated enough for them to give me their full attention. Like my pregnancy was uncomplicated. I was not high risk, which is wonderful, right? Like that's a great thing. I'm all about it. But I was also that was the first time I had ever been pregnant. And I wanted to build trust, and I wanted to build relationships. And I was not the priority in that situation for them to build relationship with and build trust with, because I wasn't in danger. I wasn't sick. That's because of the way that our whole medical system is set up and the way that those practices need to make money. They don't have time for people that aren't sick. So basically they were going off the fact of, she's probably fine and she can just trust that we've got it, and I wasn't ready to do that. I wanted more agency in that situation, and what that required was learning, and I couldn't do that all myself, and I couldn't trust that what they knew lined up with what I want. It was just, there wasn't a relationship there. And I eventually realized that it wasn't because of the bad experience I had at the beginning that I didn't want to be at this practice. It's just not what I was looking for. That the amount of time that I was able to have with them wasn't enough for me, and I had other options, right? So the birth center I ended up going to and the midwife practice I ended up going to was much more expensive. It was not covered by insurance. And through the generosity of family members and the situation of Corona and our financial situation, we were able to pay for it. So I'll also say that right now, birth centers and whatnot are sort of a privileged option because they are not covered by insurance, at least in the US, and are not insurance friendly. I don't know, just because of how the whole thing is set up and risk aversion and all of that.
Yeah.
And they don't make as much money, right? Because they're usually low risk pregnancies that go smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not making $10,000 on a surgery or more, or 30 or 50.
Yeah, that's something that made me really mad when I found out about that. That is, seems to be, could be a factor in why C-section rates are pretty high in some countries, because they make the hospital money and a vaginal birth does not. And you can take up a room for a long time in that hospital when you do a vaginal birth, and a C-section, I think is a lot faster, right?
Yeah, I think it's 45 minutes, generally speaking.
Yeah. But that's a whole nother thing. I don't know if you wanted to get into it, but that I didn't.
No, I guess I wanted to say my feelings on that situation, that it's systemic, like so many of the issues in our society. It's systemic. Yeah. And the way that our system is set up is to protect hospitals and to protect caregivers from faults or litigation or whatever, cost, all of the above. And the practitioners themselves might have different ideas, and each of them is an individual, right? Everyone is an individual and has different ideas and backgrounds about, and education and beliefs and all of the above, right? And experiences and family stories around experiences. And so everyone is going to have a different approach. But the system, the healthcare system, the way that it's set up, asks the doctor to have all of the answers and asks the patient to have none of the answers. And to completely buy into the doctor's answers at the expense, like whether or not that, yeah, I'm finding it difficult to express because I do want to be like, I have very close friends that are doctors and are obviously very thoughtful. But it's like, so in the hypnobirthing book, in the Mongan method book, she, and this was written I think in the 80s or something, but when she started teaching other people hypnobirthing and going around and talking about birth and the process of birth to lots of different people, right? Expectant mothers and also care providers, doctors. She went into a room of recently graduated medical students, like recently become doctors. And these were doctors in obstetrics. If they had ever seen a birth without any intervention, right? So without medication, without some other form of intervention, either in delivery or, any of those things, and not a single one of them raised their hands. And all this was 40 years ago. So some of those doctors are still in practice, and some of those, and probably a lot of those doctors trained doctors that are now in practice. And so it's just not in the education of our doctors. And I'm sure there's a movement to deconstruct it. I'm sure that there's lots of people who are now not in that situation anymore. But it just goes to show you that our system, as it's set up, is not set up to trust the process of birth. Which is why I was nervous giving birth in a hospital with people that I didn't know. I was nervous at the idea of giving birth in a hospital with people I didn't know, because I don't know what their education is. I don't know what their history is, and I don't know what their approach to this is. So going somewhere outside of that system gave us a whole new starting point to first establish, what are your beliefs around this? Because you are the person that's going to help me give birth. And so knowing who that person was and being able to talk to them ahead of time and figure out, where we lined up and where we didn't, and where they could educate me and where I could, say, this is what I want to happen. And if something comes up that's not in line with that, then then I am a part of the decision that decides what happens next. So yeah.
Yeah. I, for the same reason, am, at least right now, at the point that have been for a long time, that the two options for me are a birth center or a home birth with a midwife that has done my care since I started my pregnancy and is going to do the birth with me and is going to do my aftercare. So I can, what you said, get to know the person. They can get to know me. And what you said earlier, when something happens, when there comes up the need to make a decision, I can trust that person, or those people, if there are more than one person in the room, are going to make a decision that align with what I would want. Because I want to be free to let go and not have to.
Sorry, I just laughed at the toilet being flushed. It's very loud.
Nice.
I was laughing at what you were saying. You're very...
I want to be free to
not be on your guard.
Yes, and have to make a decision, have to think about it, have to discuss something. I know that I'm going to have other things to do, and I want to be able to focus on that and just trust on other people making decisions for me up to a certain point, right? But
right, I was going to jump in there, but good. Yes.
Yeah. So something that you said in a previous episode, I don't know which one, that I think the hypnobirthing one, you said so there have been, things are changing, right? There are many people that are trying to change this system that we have set up. And I say we because I think Germany and the US are, at least along the lines that we're talking, fairly similar. But it takes time to do that because, you know, it's a whole system. But I say that because we are at a point that there is a possibility that you can have the birth that you want to have at a hospital and that you're going to be listened to and that you can advocate for yourself. But, and that's something that you said in the hypnobirthing episode, it's probably gonna require you voicing those, you having to advocate for yourself in the moment, you having to raise your hand and say,
or ahead of time.
No, hold on a second. Yes, of course, ahead of time, but probably in a hospital, you're gonna have several people coming in and out, and I think, at least for me, that's the biggest difference between a hospital birth and, let's say, a birth center birth. So in the birth center, I'm gonna have this one midwife that's taking care of me, and they're gonna stay with me throughout the whole birth. And in a hospital, depending on how long I labor for, there's gonna be several midwives changing shifts.
Yeah.
Same for doctors.
Well, I will say, I think that if I had gone through to the morning, I would have gotten a second midwife, but I also knew that midwife really well.
Right.
Like, they would have had a shift change, but I also knew that person really well and had prenatal care with that person and had lots of conversation and had a relationship established with that person. So there was also that.
Yeah, so I think that is one of the big things for me, that I didn't want to need to have to get to know a new person because someone just changed shifts, or a situation comes up and we have to voice our wishes and birth plan. Neither me nor my husband, my partner, right? I want him to also be able to just be in the moment and not have to advocate for me. So I think that's just, while I believe it's possible, it's just easier to have that in a birth center.
Right. Yeah, and I would say, I think that at this point, having given birth once already, I would feel much more comfortable going into a birth situation in any environment. Like, I feel more comfortable giving birth at home. I'd feel more comfortable giving birth in a hospital, and everything in between, because I have had the experience. And obviously every birth can be vastly different. But I think that it being my first time and not necessarily having that free birth level trust in myself, to be an expert in myself and in the situation, I really wanted to feel 100% confident in the team around me. And obviously I would love that the next time around too, but if it, for whatever reason, doesn't materialize that way, I think I would feel much more comfortable in a situation that I wouldn't have the first time around.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It was a very empowering experience the whole way through. Made me trust myself and taught me how to advocate for myself and for my baby. I think grew me up a little bit in the ways that I interact with figures of authority. So that was interesting as well. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So I do have a question for you, because I think that this is a question that a lot of people would have in your situation, or if they heard about what you're planning on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a question that people had for me going to a birth center as well. What happens if that's not possible? What happens if there's something in your pregnancy, some complication that does create the possibility for danger to you or the baby in a situation where you don't have access to an operating room or medications or, whatever might be necessary?
Yeah.
Where are you at in that process?
Well, there's several layers to this. So I want to find a midwife that I feel comfortable with and that they feel comfortable with me. And I want for that person to be with me throughout the whole pregnancy and birth and postpartum. Which, okay, this is 1 minute detour. I want to give a shout out. I don't know. For anybody in Germany listening, that's going to be difficult, and I'm nervous about that because we have a lack of midwives because they get paid shit. So no one wants to be a midwife, right? Because they don't get paid anything. Not anything, but it's really, really, really little. It's really
like through the public health system?
Yes.
Okay.
And they are not allowed to, you cannot pay a midwife like privately.
Wow. What?
Which on one hand is great, so we don't create a gap. But also makes that we have no midwives.
Wow.
So I'm probably not going to be able to choose one. I have to feel happy and grateful that I got one. Like that's a problem. So my shout out being, if you live in Germany, please look into this. Speak up about it to your Krankenkasse, to your health provider. There's
insurance provider, I think.
Insurance, yeah. Social media profiles that do a lot of work around that. There's eingetragene Vereine. There's I don't know what that would be in English, that support that, and
nonprofits, probably.
Nonprofits, yes. Please look into it and start being loud because something needs to change. So, that being said, in the best case scenario that I do find a midwife that I feel great with and they feel great with caring for me, if then during the pregnancy something comes up that puts me in a high risk or whatever, then I would assess with my midwife if that means that they are not comfortable with me birthing at home. And then the question would be, is a birth center an option? And then if that is not an option for them, okay, then I would be okay with birthing in a hospital with them. So I still have this aspect of having this one person caring for me, and I don't have these shift changes.
Yeah, that is a big upside to having your midwives be part of the public system, because they can go into the hospital. I would say the vast majority of midwives in the US who are midwives like mine, who's a licensed professional midwife, there's lots of different designations of midwife in the US, and it's unregulated, which is another reason that midwives in Germany being part of the public system is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Or another upside to that system. My midwife didn't have hospital privileges, so she could go with me to the hospital, but she couldn't be in charge of my care at the hospital. She could go with me as like a birth attendant or as a support person, and I don't even know that they, especially considering the pandemic situation, I don't think that was a possibility with this one. Like if I had to transfer care, they would have taken me to the hospital and then like waved at me down the hall. So that is a major upside to that system. That's
and I don't know the details around that. I can imagine that not every midwife has privileges in every hospital, and that my midwife would have to be, well, obviously from out of this area, so they have privileges in my hospital, and I live pretty close to the hospital, so that's also great, and one of the reasons I feel even more comfortable doing it at home, because we're pretty close.
One of the reasons I didn't give birth at home was because I live minimum 20 minutes from a hospital. And the situations that I could have met, like a hemorrhage, you don't want to be 20 minutes away from anything if you're hemorrhaging. You want to be less than 5 minutes away from anything.
So I think I'm pretty sure I would be okay with all of those. I would be sad if I can't do it at home, because I have envisioned and romanticized this. But I would be okay, especially since birthing rooms and hospitals I haven't seen them in this hospital, but I know that generally they do a pretty good job, and they have hospitals have nice birthing rooms, and they have tubs.
There's been a huge amount of change over the past few decades, especially the last decade, in hospital labor and delivery care, and it's really cool and encouraging.
So I think I could make that work. I'm sure that would be fine. Something I know I do need to do work around is a C-section. I have fears and anxiety around that, and I want to and need to deconstruct that, because that is always a possibility. It could happen, and I don't want to, if that situation arises, go into that with fear. I want to be accepting of that, and also have a plan for that. And there again, in my best case scenario, my trusted midwife is with me and can advocate for me, and we have also talked this part of it through and know what we want to do, because there also another part of this movement is such a thing as gentle C-section. Is that what they're called?
That's what I've heard them called.
So I think that's really great. I'm sure a lot of that, if that was possible and if we could make that happen, that would work and make the situation a lot different than what my fear is constructing in my head. There's
a lot of, because there have been a lot of unnecessary C-sections, or they were necessary by the time that they got to C-section, right? But the interventions that led up to that final intervention, because there's been a movement to say, hey, maybe we don't need quite so many C-sections. Let's put it that way. There is a lot of negative messaging in thoughtful and gentle and non-fear-based birth messaging that are anti-C-section. And
Yeah.
and even if they're not like verbally anti-C-section, and hopefully we're not contributing to this, but even if they're not like actively anti-C-section, the whole, we probably are, but the idea of prioritizing a quote unquote normal birth, right? Prioritizing and normalizing birth that is not dangerous, then automatically creates this dichotomy, which is a somewhat false dichotomy between an unmedicated vaginal birth at home and a C-section, and those being the two extremes of the spectrum. When it's not a spectrum, it's a path with lots of branches off of it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's really important to talk about C-section and how we then metabolize it in our brains afterward, and how we, make decisions with our providers and with ourselves and our partners and our team, that allow us to be at that point and be comfortable and calm and at peace and not afraid.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool that you're ready to do that work ahead of time. I'm really excited for this whole process to see how it goes. I can't wait for the updates along the way as when eventually it does happen.
You and me both.
I'm excited about this whole journey, and I hope we get to go on it with our podcast.
Because also all of this might change, right? I hope I say this enough that this is where I'm at right now.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this might change.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious.
You might end up in the woods after all.
Yeah, or choosing to have a C-section. Who knows?
Yeah.
I'm open to other things. And this is just where I'm at right now.
Yeah. So I hope that was interesting to people. I hope we were able to express ourselves and gave you something to think about. I would love to hear how you have given birth, how you're planning to give birth, if you plan to give birth, who are the people you want in the room, and what does that room look like? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, let us know.
Okay.
Thanks for sharing all your thoughts, my love.
Thank you. I feel like I was all over the place.
Oh, I disagree.
A little nervous about this one, but it's fine. It's all good. Okay. We'll talk to you all next week.
Much love. Bye.